Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hello there, and a good morning at ya. It's a cold. Well, I guess this is seasonable. We've forgotten what it's like. It's a cold March 18th, and it's a Monday, which is to say that I'm overwhelmed by things to yap about. And I probably have to give you fair warning that a lot of the things I want to talk about are not necessarily happy things, but that is to be expected because we pay attention to the world. And even though in our personal lives happy things can happen, in the world, it seems that they're getting fewer and farther between. Fewer and further and farther. I dare you to tell me which you use in which instance. I think farther has to do more with actual distance. Oh, Cullen, shut up. Excuse me. Let me start with some personal stuff, if you don't mind. My dear sister Susan calls it my puddle, but it's a little pond I have in my backyard. And I've had it for, I don't know, maybe 20 years. And various times I've introduced fish into it. Actually, some friends put the first fish in, and they were, I guess, koi. And excuse me. And they grew to such an extraordinary size. There were 3 of them that they literally couldn't even turn around in the confines of my what looked increasingly like, yes, a puddle. And I contacted some folks in the North Hills that ran a pond place, and I said, is there any way you could come and get my poor fish and put them in that huge pond that you have? And sure enough, they came. And I mean, one of them put up such a fight when they tried to get him out that one of his fins ripped off. I was just like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. He was like amputated one of his body parts trying to save him from my puddle. It was about, I don't know, maybe 8-9 months later that I thought, geez, I wonder how my fish are doing. And I actually drove all the way out there to see my fish. Now, you might ask, how the hell am I going to recognize my fish in a place that had like about, I don't know, 80 fish swimming around? Well, it's a good question, but one of them I recognized because he only had that one fin, and it was my guy, and he looked so happy, even as an amputee. So I was thrilled. And then I went and got some more smaller little goldfish. And over the years, things happen. But it's amazing how you get attached to anything you care for. Anything that you, well, yes, feed, care for. There was one year where I lost almost all of them, and I don't know, one was sucked into I don't know what happened. It was horrible. So I decided that I went to the little pet store near me, and I saw this this one tank where they had like a gazillion little teeny weeny fish, and they're like, I mean, I couldn't really a zillion. I'm not even just slightly. Am I exaggerating? And I said to the guy, "What are those?" And he said, "Those are feeder fish." And I said, "Feeder fish?" He said, "Yeah, you people who have fish that eat fish, or other things that eat fish, this is the fish that this is food, food for fish." And I looked at those little guys and I thought, oh, geez, you're born just to get eaten like that? And I felt sorry for him. And I said, well, how much if you were to give me like 10 of them or something? And he said, oh, heck. And he just like scooped up a whole bunch in a net and he put them in a thing and he gave them to me. And I brought them back to my now it looked like a definite, not a puddle, but a pond because they're so tiny. I threw them in. And lo and behold, after 8 years, 2 of those fish were still alive. And they'd grown so big. It was amazing. Not too big, but like about 7 inches when they'd been not even half an inch. I don't know. And they were my guys. And this spring, I opened their pond sooner than I normally do because it's been so warm. They hibernate in it all winter. And there they were. It was such a joy to see them. And when they saw me, they, come right over and start opening their mouths like, feed me, feed me. So I did. All this is to say that yesterday I was in my house. I was near a window. I was looking out. And then I saw it. A huge hawk. Bang! I mean, it was so fast. Bang! Down into my pond. Up he came with fish. One of my fish in his damn claws, and off he flew with it hanging there. I cannot get that picture of that gorgeous golden fish. Anyway, so that was a bad thing that happened to me yesterday. I know it's natural, it's nature, and that fish got 6-7 years of life that it would not have had. So there's all of that. But I felt stalked by death. Right after that, I had to go to a dinner, and at the dinner, I saw, for the first time since the massacre at Tree of Life, 2 of the people who I knew who were so impacted that day. A woman whose husband, a marvelous, marvelous man, a doctor, Jerry Rabinowitz, who was killed. And Dan Leger, who was with Jerry and was also mowed down by that anti-Semite, but who astonishingly lived after enduring God knows how many surgeries and having half of his insides pulverized. And then I sat down with a rabbi that was there, and he said, Jared Cohen died today. I said, oh my God, Jared Cohen. Do you know the name? You should. He was the president of CMU for quite a long time. He died at his home unexpectedly. He was the 8th president of Carnegie Mellon University, and he had a pretty incredible tenure there, where the university became one of the preeminent institutions of higher learning in the world. When I walked into this event I was at last night, after I saw I was led into the synagogue where it was by a armed police officer through a side door. The main doors of that synagogue are not used anymore, cannot be secured as easily, I guess. And one of the things I thought when that horror happened at Tree of Life was that, and when it became known that the killer was influenced by Donald Trump's rhetoric about immigrants invading our country, and how he was influenced by the right-wing anti-Semites who were in Charlottesville, who Donald Trump said very fine people on both sides. They were chanting something that I had never heard before: the Jews will not replace us. And that was the first I learned about the replacement theory that so many on the right, and I suspect maybe even the left now, have come to embrace, that Jews are somehow, I don't know. So after that happened, I remember thinking that maybe now that this horrible act had put the spotlight on growing anti-Semitism in America, and maybe those fine and good people who were slaughtered that day, that their deaths could have a purpose in awakening us to this growing hate. And you know what? Since then, the opposite has happened. It's only grown. It's grown and grown and grown to the point where Jewish students now at universities live in fear. And lest you think that, again, Jews are overstating this, I would hope you would read an op-ed by David French that was in the New York Times, I think, earlier this week. And he is not He's a very strong Christian. In fact, he was raised an evangelical Christian, and he's a wonderful source of of understanding what is going on in Christian circles. And he wrote a piece that just, it wasn't that he told me anything I hadn't known, but coming from him with the urgency it was coming really freaked me out. He talked about the fact that Jewish students had a march at Berkeley about a week ago. And he said that it made the news for a very odd reason. It made the news because these Jews were able to do it without being attacked. That is how media presented it. The Jews were marching because an Israeli speaker that they had brought in, that event was frighteningly broken up. And a Berkeley administration said there was no way to ensure the safety of anybody there, given the threat of violence by the crowd. David French went on to say that he says, I spent virtually my entire legal career, I didn't know he had been a lawyer, defending free speech on campus, especially Muslim students and staff. And during those decades, he said, of litigation and my subsequent years in journalism, I have never seen such comprehensive abuse directed against a vulnerable minority group on campus as I have seen directed at Jews and Jewish students and faculty since October 7, when over 1,000 Jews were slaughtered in Israel. It seems like Jew killing begets Jew killing. He says what's happening to Jewish students at several elite campuses is so comprehensive and all-consuming that it can only be described as systemic anti-Semitism. And he goes on and on and on, and he says what is happening at these schools is, the word he uses is dreadful. Dreadful. How universities are allowing pro-Palestinian protesters, despite the fact that many of their demonstrations violate university protocols for protest, and the fact that these protests are threatening Jewish students quite blatantly. Jews at MIT were warned to not directly engage protesters for your physical safety and well-being, and ideally avoid any area where protests are occurring. And in fact, what this, as French points out, resulted in is parts of campus being effectively closed to Jewish students. At one of the universities, a bounty was put on a Jewish student. $800 award for identifying the student, who now has police protection. A professor who is part of MIT's Global Experience program said that while he was in the office where they were, I guess, there was an Israeli internship program. He said students protesting outside were banging on the doors of the offices. Staff were closed inside. It goes on and on and on and on and on. The Jewish kids at universities are living with fear. Harvard Law School. Campus police allegedly observed passively as a mob of protesters stormed Harvard Law's main building, marched down the length of the building's first-floor hallway, and blocked the hallway outside the study room where students against anti-Semitism were listening to a speaker. Fearing a violent attack, students in the room removed any indications of their Jewishness, locked the doors, barricaded the doors, and hid under their desk. David French says, pause and think about that for a moment. In the year 2024, at one of the most prestigious and powerful academic institutions in the world, and these people are bringing suit, have brought a lawsuit against Harvard. The plaintiffs claim that Jewish students felt the need literally to hide and barricade themselves for their physical safety. He says, I urge you to read these legal complaints. You will see that there is a certain dreadful sameness to all of the stories. Universities and schools demonstrate far greater tolerance for anti-Semitic speech and behavior than for virtually any other kind of offensive speech or behavior. They bend or break the rules to accommodate pro-Palestinian protests. Jewish students then face intimidation and even assault. No one should excuse the targeting of Jewish students in America, he says, as mere anti-Zionism. You know, remember, when American Muslims are targeted or persecuted because of the actions of Muslim extremists overseas, that is acknowledged as Islamophobia. And that is what's happening now to America's Jews and Jews all over the world right now. And that is happening from not the right that slaughtered the Jews at Tree of Life, but from the progressive left. French writes, when you see the radical left target Jews and then claim they're merely anti-Zionist, they give the game away, because to them, Judaism is Zionism. he sees America retreating into the darkness of this ancient bigotry. And I must say, um, I must say that being, I was with so many Jews last night that, and that's all we're talking about, the fact that we're barricaded in our synagogues now. We police around us, things on the walls that we can pull if somebody gets in and is attempting to harm us. I'm pushing 8 decades. Well, actually, I've done 8 decades. I have never experienced this in this country, nor has any other Jew. There is something happening now that is part and parcel of what we talk about almost every day, and that is the saving of democracy. John Adams, founding father, let me quote him. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Now, I'll pull the religion part out of that. I don't agree, but moral, I will. And we cannot maintain this government if we lose and our country loses sight of the common humanity of the people of this country. Let me back away just for a bit. Lot going on in the sports world. And if you think I'm not going to get totally into it, you're nuts, because everyone needs distraction in these times. And wow, I just want to say that I was not looking forward to the Steelers season, but I sure as hell am now. Good God Almighty, what the heck? So very un-Steeler-like administratively to do something so what? Shocking, surprising. Kenny Pickett. Who's Kenny Pickett? Really? In another 5 years, 3 years, you won't remember the guy's name. He gone. And what's so odd is he's gone to sit on the bench across the state in Philly. And now we've got 2 quarterbacks, neither of whom we've ever had before. Russell Wilson, who, well, as we know, has quite an impressive career, but is nearing the end of it. And a young quarterback from the Chicago Bears, Justin Fields, who presumably will sit on the bench, even though he started for the Bears, because he can learn so much from a veteran like Russell Wilson. I read in The Athletic that it says Fields brings a different dynamic as a strong runner, and he's still improving as a passer. But the question is how the Steelers are going to divide the offensive schemes between these two very different types of quarterbacks. Both men are entering pivotal career seasons, both of them, albeit on different ends of the spectrum. One starting what we hope to be a stellar career, and the other ending what was a stellar career. But what that means is each of these guys needs to play really well. And no one would have thought that the Steelers would be the team to watch this year, but they are now, just to see what the heck is going to happen. And the best sports story of all is the University of Duquesne Dukes coming from nowhere to make the NCAA tournament. Unbelievable. They haven't been there since 1977. Whoa. I was just starting my TV career then. That was so long ago, and they came on strong at the end. What a scrappy bunch. And just want to say, I'm rooting for the Dukes. So there's all of that. Oh, and one other I just want to mention, sports related. Aaron Donald, who might be one of the greatest players to ever play professional football, retired from the Los Angeles Rams this week, and he played at Pitt, probably the greatest player to come out of Pitt, and God knows there have been a lot. Nothing against Marino or Dorsett, but Aaron Donald, just an extraordinary player. I was looking at videotape of him while he was at Pitt, and he literally tackles two people at once. He wraps his arms around two and takes them down. It was unbelievable. Unbelievable. And on top of that, he's a good guy. So just saying. And that brings me actually to an obituary. I haven't had an obit in a while, so let me do it. And I hadn't heard of this guy, but what an amazing story of somebody who persevered despite having handicaps, as he himself put it. His name is Doug Blevins. I don't expect that you have heard of him, but you might know some of the football players that he made great. And they're all kickers. Adam Vinatieri, Justin Tucker. That's if you're into NFL football. I mean, Vinatieri, he is the NFL's career scoring leader with the Patriots and the Colts. He kicked 2 Super Bowl winning field goals. Tucker of the Ravens holds the league record for the highest percentage of field goals made. And this guy coached them both from a wheelchair, having never himself kicked a football. never himself played football. It's an extraordinary story. He was born with cerebral palsy. And he was fascinated by football. He knew he was never going to play it, but he still thought he could be part of it. And in fact, he wheeled himself into a college coach's office in Tennessee and said, "Coach, I've lived with cerebral palsy all my life, but I'm a linebacker at heart. I love football, and I want to be part of it." And what he was able to do is, by just extraordinarily careful observation of how a hip rotates, how a leg swings, what angle the toe should be at, he figured out how to be a great kicker. And so he ended up in the NFL. The Patriots first signed him. And Vinatieri said, I would not be who I am without him. He then went to the Dolphins as that team's kicking coach. He ended up just privately working with people after, I'm not sure why, but Doug Blevins, ladies and gentlemen, and he died young at the age of 60. I just thought his story was amazing. Chuck writes, now if we could only convince Tyler Boyd to come back and play for the Steelers. Come on home, Tyler. Well, I don't know. And somebody's asking, where's Clarence? I don't know. I guess I could try to reach out, and maybe I will, but people are allowed to to live their lives, but I have wondered too. He does seem to be gone. I mean, I don't mean that in a dark way. He seems to be gone. Did you see who RFK Jr. picked as his running mate? Did you see it? And speaking again of football, it wasn't, who, the creep Rogers. That was a big story last week. No, he picked, and this is, it's just equally mind-blowing. He picked a woman named, I think, Nicole Shanahan. And Nicole Shanahan was the wife of the co-founder of Google, Sergey Brin. And then they split, and it was widely believed that the split was caused because Nicole was stooping, that's Yiddish for you-know-whating, was stooping another billionaire, and actually one of her husband's best friends, a guy whose name you might in fact know, Elon Musk. So that's who RFK Jr. has chosen as his running mate. And that certainly will, I'm sure, make people realize how seriously he is taking this effort to become the president of the United States. God almighty. Can't make it up. Okay, so I read many disquieting things this morning. You know, I think it was during Reagan's presidency that these conservative think tanks just started sprouting up at universities and all over the place. And my understanding is part of what was behind their mission was to create studies that would play up a conservative point of view, to create experts by virtue of their being affiliated with these institutes, and having these people then putting out a constant sort of acceptable view of right-wing political solutions back when they had some. Now, one of these groups was the Heritage Foundation. I'm sure you're aware of that place. They're still very much alive. And to show how much alive they are and how important they still are, I want to tell you something that, again, our media did not focus on when the Hungarian autocrat Viktor Orban came to the United States to, well, help Donald Trump. And after leaving Mar-a-Lago, where did the Hungarian prime minister go? Well, he didn't go to meet with anybody in the American government, which is what usually gets done when heads of state come to the country. No, he made a beeline to the Washington headquarters of the Heritage Foundation and spoke privately to a bunch of far-right politicians, analysts, and what is called public personalities. One can only imagine. The Heritage Foundation, it turns out, is working with Orban to set up Trump's agenda when he wins again. The guy who heads the institute now is a guy named, I'm forgetting his first name, Roberts, Kevin Roberts. And he's full on Trump. And he is full on Orban. And it turns out the Heritage Foundation is working on, first of all, they've joined up with one of Orban's foundations called the Danube Institute. They now have a formal partnership. Oh, shut the F up. Excuse me. You read these things and you think, why why aren't I learning this from you? I learned this because I read a woman called Heather Cox Richardson, who is a brilliant historian and observer of the current political scene. And she's on top of stuff constantly. There is something called Project 2025. And that is something the Heritage Foundation is working on. And that is the blueprint for autocracy in the United States with Donald Trump in the White House. Now, stop and think of how, you know, you might see on CNN or on any other source and quotes from so and so at the Heritage Foundation because it has a certain legitimacy to it. There's a 1,000-page document they put out. And the top of what they want to do is restore the family. Restore family authority and cohesion. And it goes on to say that that means eliminating any words associated with sexual orientation, gender identity, gender, abortion, reproductive health, or reproductive rights from any government regulation, rule, or law. It said any reference to transgenderism is pornography. The overturning of Roe v. Wade must be celebrated, and it must be understood that it is just the beginning. They talk about Project 2025 firing much of the current government workforce and replacing it with loyalists. This goes on and on and on and on. Project 2025, understand this is real. It exists. It exists at the highest levels. It exists with, getting the nod from Hungary's dictator, and it exists to get Trump elected. And right after I read that, I read something, and again, I want to credit again. The news sources I now look at, Public Source, which I give money to, that's local journalists doing really good work, and WESA, local journalists doing really good work. I give money to them rather than give money to that anti-union rag, the Post-Gazette. I give to these nonprofits who are doing journalism correctly. And it turns out that here in Allegheny County, there is a large group of fervent Trumpians attempting to pull people off the voting rolls of Allegheny County. It's a systemic, serious effort. These are people who believe the big lie and believe that elections, that there are a lot of people voting who shouldn't have voted or couldn't have voted. So it turns out that anyone, any citizen, this is by Pennsylvania law, any resident can challenge the voter eligibility of any other person registered in the same municipality. So you are free to, now you got to do some work. You have to sign affidavits, you have to have things notarized, you have to do some homework. This bunch of folks have now what they have an assembly line of people. They have a number of notaries who are working for them pro bono, and they have already inundated the election office here with 16,000 two-page affidavits seeking the removal of voters. Each affidavit goes after one voter. And what they're doing is looking for anyone who had a change of address. Now, you can have a change of address and you're still in the municipality. I've had a number of changes of address since I moved to Pittsburgh. They would go after me. The manager of Allegheny County's Division of Elections said the number of challenges he's seeing is unlike anything they have ever seen before. He was stunned by them. He sought help from the Pennsylvania Department of State on how to handle them. Just so you know, if you get a letter from the county, open it, whether you think it's nothing, because it could be you got challenged by these SOBs. And you have to respond and tell them, no, I'm still here. I live here. One of the guys who's leading this says, I grew up on the streets of Lawrenceville, and when you get me in a fight, I fight like a dog. Interestingly, Sam DeMarco, who is a leading Allegheny County Republican and a member of the Board of Elections, and the chairman of the Republican Committee of Allegheny County, has said that this guy who fights like a dog and the other people working with him are people, quote, who believe Trump won and the election was stolen. And so they're looking for anything they can do. I would have preferred if the focus had been getting the vote out. DeMarco says what these guys are claiming is false. He says, I can't tell you how many hours of my life I've wasted trying to debunk these stories. I deal with these people from across the state that wake up one day and they believe they've just discovered this incredible fraud. There are people out there that anything they see they don't understand, they automatically say is fraud. I can only tell them the truth, but they're not hearing it. So that's a heads up that those people who would steal from us, our democracy, are working tirelessly and constantly to do so. There is a frightening report out of Arizona. I think its most populous county, Maricopa County, where their county board, when it meets, has to have constant security. These are public meetings. They meet twice a month. And now there was a point at which some of these Trumpians literally stormed the dais that they were sitting at, and they had to run for their lives, sort of reminiscent of January 6th. This story, I believe I got from the Washington Post. So the Board of Supervisors in Phoenix, in Maricopa County, are now living with constant threats, physical, online. And here's the thing, which is so fascinating. They're Republicans. They're just not Trumpers. They're Republicans. There are people now who is an organized group, and they will stop at nothing. They're not all Republicans. Since the 2020 vote, the supervisors, most of whom are Republicans, have faced constant threats. Can you imagine? They say they've become accustomed to the crowds of people who disparage them in public places. They have recently become more aggressive. It's you read this. They've installed video cameras in the chamber where they meet. At their meetings now, there are a dozen uniformed and undercover law enforcement officers or security guards. There are sheriff's deputies outside. There are members of a SWAT team that are always ready. This is your country today. So when I say that this election is so important, and also when I say that when we vote Trump out again, there will be trouble again, because these people have lost their minds. They've gone down the rabbit hole. They are lost, and they are violent. They are fearful, and they are violent. It's just unbelievable. Who will stand for public office? This is what they do. They try to intimidate and terrorize. These are now all domestic terrorists, essentially. They're working night and day to undermine our democracy. And we ignore this at our, and mostly our children's and children's children's peril. I'm sorry that it's all so bleak, but it is what is. It is what is. And I'll end with a quote by the late, great George Carlin, if and I can find it. Oh, come on, let me find it. It's so wonderful. I might be able to paraphrase it, but that's not as good, is it? Dang it. Why does this always happen? The very thing I want, I can't find. Okay, here it is. All right, hang on. I got it. It was crumpled up. George Carlin. Think of how stupid the average person is and realize half of them are stupider than that. Sorry, but I didn't say it. George Carlin said it, and I suspect he was, and we see it now. Right. God help us, and do not let down your guard.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.